All right. Thank you. All right, let me ask you a question. Do you like conflict? Yes, there we go. All right. My daughter loves conflict. So, of course, I hate conflict. It makes me uncomfortable. And from the response I see, I gather that a lot of you feel just like me. And you're not to blame. Conflict can be disruptive, it can be toxic, and it can even be dangerous. So even though studying conflict can be downright depressing, it's something I've devoted my life to. And people have asked me, why is this the case? Why have you devoted your life to something so inherently divisive? Well, this is because while there's many times I've seen counterproductive conflict, I've also seen conflict as a productive force that has changed things for the better. So I wanted to introduce you to a new idea: conflict as a vehicle for social change, conflict as a way to spur positive discourse that can lead to the betterment of society. So my own personal experiences have been shaped by my past. My family is from Taiwan, and for years I've seen the people of Taiwan productively engage in conflict. Now, what was the goal of their conflict? Well, their goal was not to repeat history. For years, the people of Taiwan suffered under bloody martial law, a time known as the White Terror. And as a result, the people of Taiwan are extremely vocal about their opinions because of how much they value their freedom. You might have seen images of lawmakers throwing pig guts at each other in protest against pork imports. Or you may have seen this death metal rock star, Freddie Lim, become a government official because of his activism. Or you might have seen university students rallying in an effort to protect their democracy in the Sunflower Movement. These are all just some key images of the vivid civic engagement I've seen in Taiwan. Now, the energy I've seen in Taiwan is reflected globally, as conflict has been an important root and driver of many important conversations throughout the world. So you might ask, how can I transform good conflict into bad conflict? Well, what I want to talk about today is how each individual can spur social change in their own communities by transforming conflict. So I want to be clear, while it can take time, years, even decades, for social change to occur, each individual matters. So what I want to provide with you are 3 considerations to think about when you're trying to change your own communities. Words matter, people matter, and the moment matters. What I'm going to dive into now are some key tips that you can use to spark change. So let me start with the first tip. Think about the words that you want to use. My research suggests that if you want to achieve something different, then use different words. Let's consider one of the biggest challenges we face when we're trying to spur conflict. Engaging with those that are different from yourself, such that they hear what you have to say. And even with the best intentions for harmony, unfortunately, these conversations can backfire and create greater divide. So, what's been increasingly clear to me is that the words that we use are key in either creating division or collaboration. So let me tell you an interesting study that illustrates my point. Imagine you are taking part of a game, and this game is called the community game. And within this game, you and another person have to decide whether to cooperate or to compete with one another. And you don't know what the other person's going to do. Now, these decisions jointly predict what your outcomes are going to be. Now, so what you have to do now is decide what to do. And the gist of the game is this, is that if you both decide to compete, then you both get the worst outcome possible. You get absolutely nothing. If you decide to cooperate, you get the best outcome of them all. And this seems like a no-brainer, right? Why wouldn't you cooperate in order to get the most points for your community? But here's the little wrinkle. Let's imagine instead of this being called the community game, this game is called the Wall Street game. Now, the points haven't changed at all, only the name of the game has changed. When I think Wall Street, I think people that want to make as much money as possible for themselves. And think about how this would change the way you play the game. Suddenly, cooperation doesn't seem so appealing when all your partner has to do is to compete and walk away with 80 sweet points while you walk away with less than nothing. So let's think about what the results might be. The researchers ran this particular study, and what they found is that if it was called the community game, 80%, 70% of people decided to cooperate. But what about the Wall Street game? If it was called the Wall Street game, 70% of individuals decided to compete. This one small shift in language dramatically changed the outcomes of the game. And of course, this has important implications for those that want to make social change. Often we come into conversations around social justice these days, much like the Wall Street game. We come prepared to battle. And in these battles, we're ready to tell the other side the 10 reasons why we're right and the 10 flaws in the other side's arguments. In other words, instinctively, we view that these situations are filled with winners and losers, where the object of the game is winning. Now, in an attempt to win every single argument, we don't realize we're facing a losing proposition. That if we're in situations like this, the other side's going to be on the defensive. So what I suggest is moving away from a situation when there are absolute winners and absolute losers, and instead think about the situation in terms of cooperation by invoking this concept of community, using words like we and us. And this is what I've seen when I teach conflict resolution. I see that the students that I have that are able to use this simple shift in language are the ones that are able to transform the tenor of the conversation from opposition to what they can achieve together. The language can be what changes us from bitter enemies to potential allies. So this brings me to my second point. While words are very important, the people that we engage with are of equal importance. So my second tip is to think about who you want to inspire and how to inspire them. I've learned something new in my research. While words do indeed matter, they don't matter for everyone in the same way. There's a huge spectrum of individuals that you're going to be talking to. Those that agree with you, those that are on the fence, and those that disagree with you. And it's important to understand what words resonate with each of these different types of people. So on one hand, my research shows that words can energize people with similar goals, bringing them together on behalf of a shared cause. On the other hand, while some words can inspire you, they're the same words that will potentially deflate others. What you can see on the screen are some of the most popular hashtags seen on social media related to social movements. And they are likely to cause different types of emotions. Some might fill you with pride and excitement. Others may leave you feeling lukewarm or even fill you with disgust. What this means is that the words that energize you may fail to attract the attention of those beyond those who already share your goals. So how do you open the door for conversation? Well, one thing to do if you're trying to get wider appeal is to focus on the language around the goal, rather than using potentially polarizing words that may create bigger division. Another thing to consider is consider the perspective of those who are not like-minded. If you were these individuals, what words would resonate with you? So let's talk about this idea in a context that's very important, climate change. Researchers have examined this topic about how different words may resonate with different people when it comes to climate change. And while most Americans agree that climate change is an issue, there is a difference in perceived urgency by political affiliation, with people who identify as liberals seeing it as more urgent than those who identify as conservatives. There's another line of interesting research that shows that liberals and conservatives also differ in how much they value certain things. In general, liberals tend to value protecting the world from harm, while conservatives tend to value preserving things that they consider to be pure or sacred. So using this framework, what researchers decided to do was to try to understand why liberals tend to view climate change as a more important issue. And what they saw is that actually the language used to discuss climate change resonates more in general with liberals. If we see the public discussions and the public announcements around climate change, it often highlights the importance of protecting the world from harm, devastation, and destruction. Because preventing harm is more important to liberals, this harm-based language appeals particularly to liberals. So the question they asked is, what words would potentially resonate with conservatives? And what they started thinking about was that past work, showing that conservatives value maintaining things that they consider pure or sacred. So could it be, by framing environmental appeals around purity, that would also increase levels of support? So this is exactly the study that they ran. What they did is they placed both liberals and conservatives into one of three groups. In the first group, the individuals read a statement about the importance of protecting the environment from harm. This is the traditional statement that you're used to seeing within public announcements. This was accompanied by pictures of the environment being harmed, things like a dead coral reef and a devastated forest. The second group of individuals read a statement about the importance of an uncontaminated and pure environment. And in this case, it was accompanied by pictures of impure environments, a polluted city, contaminated drinking water. And in the last group, researchers wanted them to read a truly neutral statement that's unrelated to the environment. And in this particular case, they read about the history of neckties. So what were their findings? Well, after they read these statements, they asked participants to rate their level of support of pro-environmental causes. And what they found was that in terms of the neckties and the preventing harm conditions, we see that classic social divide. Liberals supported these environmental efforts more than conservatives. However, in the purity condition, what we saw was that this difference disappeared, such that the levels of conservative support raised to the level of liberal support. So what this means is that different words can appeal to different people, and by taking the perspective of those around you and carefully choosing your words, you can appeal to people who might otherwise not engage. So this brings me to my last point. While the first two tips talked about how words can help expand your social horizon, my last tip talks about how you can shift your time horizon to do the same thing. Think beyond the moment. Now, in the interviews I've done with successful social activists, I noticed a unique ability for them to think beyond the moment. They were the ones that were able to see social change on a grander scale. Now, what's important about this long-term perspective is that it allows for optimism. If you're stuck in the moment, you tend to view every interaction as building momentum, or it stops you in your tracks. If you're in the moment, you tend to strive for perfection. And if it isn't a fairy tale ending, then it's an epic tragedy. If you think beyond the moment, however, you see opportunities in more nuanced and less polarizing ways. You realize that small gains can build into larger ones over time. You realize that putting a discussion on the map is even progress. One of the activists that I interviewed said something that I thought was really telling, which I'll share here. Why push against a rock that isn't going to move? If we're in the moment, we tend to spend a lot of time trying to convince that one person who may never be convinced. These people are like rocks on a path. If you focus exclusively on them, they'll stop your forward motion. So what I suggest instead is to be more like water and move past them. Thinking long-term allows you to focus on those individuals who are more likely to move and understand that social change takes the hands of a number of different people. And in some ways, a stream of pressure moves a stream can move a rock a lot further than one single attempt at brute force. And I've seen this. My students attempting to resolve conflict, the ones that are the most successful are the ones that view the situation like a stream. They're the ones that don't get bogged down by just one obstacle. So here's what I want to leave you with. Over time, I've learned to embrace conflict. And I've started to realize that the dark dangers of conflict can be transformed into something a lot more extraordinary. And the essence of my research has shown that by choosing words that build community, by inspiring people with words that resonate, that thinking in the long term to build momentum all matters. Now, this, of course, has implications. Broader implications for society. Imagine if we could have tense conversations and resolve them collectively. Imagine if we could reshift our perspective on conflict so we don't come to discussions angry or defensive. Imagine what we could accomplish and what doors this would open. It all starts with you. Thank you.